Alright, here we are. We're going to try to do a video today on the performance portion of the Southwest VA new LUVCARS 5 program and show you what Ryan and the guys have done to import some data to make this whole simulation experience as good as it can possibly be for you guys from a performance standpoint. We'll jump into LUVCARS 5 here and show you a few things. By now, I'm sure you have seen this program. If you haven't, I highly suggest you get on that because it's pretty awesome. So once you select a flight, you're going to get all these different tabs here, your overview. In this case, I'm doing Los Angeles to Sacramento. Dispatch tab. So when you come to this tab, this will be blank on this side. Your configuration will be available. And you can modify any of these things here: cruise altitude, taxi out, contingency hold in terms of time and what it calculates for fuel, or extra fuel. In this case, it's pounds, so 200 pounds of extra fuel. You can put in your airport alternates there in case you need alternates, looking at your weather to see whether or not you need an alternate. We've gone over a lot of that stuff in different videos, so I'm not going to go into detail on that today. This is strictly about performance. We have mentioned previously too, you want to make sure that you're actually using a tail number that is a 700 versus an 800. If that's what you're looking to do, there can be some issues with that. Once you've got all that set the way you like it, click Request Dispatch. It's going to go to SimBrief. It's going to pull out a dispatch release and an OFP back for you. If you have SimBrief downloader, you can then make sure that that's all been exported so that you can simply load straight into the FMC in the PMDG, and I've got that set up. So we got dispatch release 1 here, departing LA, going to Sacramento, 1 hour 9 minutes of flying time. We've got flight 1448, nose 8312, which is a 700, capacity of 143 passengers, ATOG, allowable takeoff gross weight of 135.1, which is landing weight limited. Meaning if I took off at more than 135.1, I wouldn't burn enough fuel to get down to my max landing weight or my structural landing weight in Sacramento. So that's a never exceed weight. Look at it like that. And usually you're not going to be that close to ATOG, but it is something to pay attention to. Our routing, top of climb, winds, temperature at cruise, our fuel, weight section, and our performance section that dispatch used with the runways and conditions to calculate performance and our ATOG. This is a huge section here, particularly for what we were doing today, your fuel and your weight. So in route burn of 5.9, contingency hold there, so 20 minutes, 1.7. We've got our standard FAR reserve of 45 minutes of gas, 3.2 today. Gives us a minimum takeoff of 10.8. Extra of 200 pounds, we put here. Planned taxi out of 300 pounds, 10 minutes, that's what we put here. To give us a minimum plan of 11.3. Jump over to this side, our operational weight. The jet weighs 84,495. You add the payload, which is passengers and cargo. Again, this is a planned weight, not necessarily exactly what you're going to have. Maybe somebody doesn't show up, or maybe they add more cargo. That number will differ between the time you get the dispatch release and the time you get the actual performance data. Zero fuel weight of 119.3 is less than our maximum zero fuel weight limitation, so that's good, obviously. Fuel on board, 11,000 pounds. That's going to be for takeoff. So if you look at our min planned of 11.3, subtract out the taxi fuel of 300 pounds, that gets you down to 11,000 pounds for takeoff. Gives us a takeoff weight of 130.3, burn 5,900 en route, and land at 124.4. So let's jump over to our jet, look at the FMC, and a few things that you need to plug in. Now, I know some guys have said that they had some discrepancies with weights or speeds, and I think a lot of your problems probably come from these pages here. So once you hit menu and go to FS Actions, what we're looking at here is what we want to weigh. This is what we're planning. And what we've got here is what we actually weigh. We need to make the jet actually weigh what we want it to weigh. So how you do that is, use whatever fueling or external programs you use. For this instance, you know, I'm just trying to do this quickly here. So what we're going to do is we're going to put our min planned fuel in here of 11.3. So now I'm fueled. I'm set with gas. Okay. Payload. Now, right now I've got this set to max. So it's got max cargo, max passengers. My planned zero fuel weight was 119.3. So I'm going to put that in here, and I'm going to make this jet weigh 119,300 pounds. And you can see what it did. It reduced cargo, reduced passengers, so that the jet weighs 119,300 pounds. Now, the jet matches what it actually weighs with what I want it to weigh in terms of my planning. So we should be in good shape here. If I look at this again, I got zero fuel weight of 19.3 plus my gas of 11.3 brings me up to 130.6 gross weight. That's what we weigh right now, sitting here on the ramp. If I add my takeoff weight here of 130.3 plus my taxi out fuel, because we're still sitting at the gate, I haven't moved yet, that's 130.6. So you can see we're actually sitting here exactly how we want to look. Our numbers now should match up very closely. So let's go back into the FMC. I've already got the route loaded up. Got to have the runway or you're not going to get numbers. And we'll go to a net ref. Takes us to our first page of our performance init. I'm going to go ahead and do the request data here because I had SimBrief SimLoader running, and so it should bring in most of this data automatically for me. There are a few things that you're going to have to verify. You may even have to change. I'm going to actually execute that once, execute that twice, apparently to verify that 19.3, which is great. Verify that number. Now, I could put this number to anything I want. That's just going to be for the performance. That's not going to actually cause the aircraft to actually weigh 119.3. That has to be done here in the payload portion. So make sure that that's all been set up properly. And then come over here and verify that data. So 119.3, gross weight of 30.8. It's sensing 11,500 pounds of gas. That's a little high. We don't usually put this number in, but I'm going to go ahead and just put in 11.0 here for my planned takeoff weight or takeoff fuel. And then that actually shows 130.3 right here, which is my planned takeoff weight of 130.3. So far, I'm right where I want to be. I did not have an alternate, so I'm going to go ahead and change this back to 4.4. Cost index is 40. I'll put the initial cruise winds in, 266, 52. Again, if you have SimBrief loader, all that exports properly. If you go to legs, route data, request winds at cruise, it'll bring those winds in. Descent, forecast, request winds, it'll bring in the descent winds as well. That's for a different day. You can verify all that data. Our temperature deviation is actually minus 57, so I'll go ahead and change that. Alright, so we match up there. Alright, N1 limit. Now here's where we start getting into the actual performance numbers. So back to our LUVCARS. Our performance, we can take a quick look at the weather here. Los Angeles, 7 miles viz, view at 900, overcast 1400 feet, temperature of 13. No mention of wet runways or wind shear. So we'll just go ahead and go with that. Our arrival weather at Sacramento, 9 degrees, broken 25,000 feet, nice day over there. So let's go to our performance tab. Now here's our departure information. 119.3, we've talked about that a few times. Remember our planned takeoff fuel of 11.0, and so far our FMC matches perfectly. Runway 24 left, runway condition code is dry, nothing was in the ATIS, there's no precipitation falling, there's nothing in the NOTAMs or anything about wet runways, or in the ATIS rather. Bleeds, yes. Now there's no way for LUVCARS to tell you whether or not you need a bleeds off takeoff. That's something that would actually come from the performance data from the satellite. We don't input that. That's something that comes back to us, but they have no way to do that. So you're going to have to decide whether or not you want to do a bleeds on or bleeds off takeoff. Now, if you're at a high altitude airport, it's hot, you're heavy, or you're flying a really long leg length like Midway to Burbank or Burbank to Midway, and you're full and it's hot, there's a good chance you're going to have a flaps 25 bleeds off takeoff. You're just going to have to determine whether or not you think you might be in a scenario that would require a bleeds off takeoff. If it is, then say bleeds no. Otherwise, just 99% of the time, you're going to leave that as yes. Engine anti-ice, no. Let's go back to the weather. So Los Angeles is 13 degrees. Now, if Los Angeles was 10 degrees or colder, and I had to use RCC of 5, 4, 3, 2, or 1, then I would say engine anti-ice, yes. Since it's above 10 degrees centigrade, or even if it was 10 degrees centigrade but it's dry, that's a no. Wind shear, no mentions of wind shear in the area, so we will leave that as no. Max thrust, we'll leave that as no. I could force it as a yes. Now, if I do wind shear yes, it will force a max thrust takeoff. So we're going to do that just for grins here, and we'll run both the wind shear with max thrust, and we're going to run it without wind shear to get a reduced thrust, and we're going to compare the numbers in the jet. So you can see it brought over 13 degrees outside air temperature, magnetic winds of 0.68 at 3. Those guys brought over the magnetic variation to give you magnetic winds. QNH, altimeter of 2998, runway 24 left, stopping margin of 5,432 feet. What does that mean? That's basically that's my accelerate stop. If I was to initiate my takeoff roll, I had an engine failure, fire, wind shear caution, or alert, whatever that caused me to abort my takeoff right prior to V1, I would stop this aircraft with 5,432 feet of runway remaining with an RTO procedure. Brakes, RTO, speed brakes deployed, thrust reversers, and I'd stop the aircraft with 5,432 feet remaining. ATOG, we talked about that, 135.1 takeoff weight. That's my planned takeoff weight of 130.3. Maximum runway takeoff weight limitation 166.3 is climb limited. That'd be for obstacles. We've talked about that some already. Selected, we don't have a selected temperature to give us a reduced thrust. So we're going to have a max blast takeoff here. It says wind shear yes, max thrust required. Flaps 1, V1 of 126, 128, 137. Now we'd plug in 148 in the scratch pad. That's our accelerated VR in case of wind shear. Not going to go into a ton of detail here. It's another 10-minute discussion. Trim of 6.1. Min cleanup altitude of 1128, and our engine failure procedure is a straight out 251. So if we had an engine failure or a fire right at V1, we rotate. We're going to climb up to 1128, fly straight out runway heading, regardless of our clearance. We're going to declare the emergency, come back around, land. So we're going to do that, run our checklist, come back and land. You can see all the different runway configurations here. So say 24 left at Echo 7's 9,770 feet available. You can even do that over here if you wanted to and run those numbers. See what you get for different speeds and thrust settings. So let's plug that in. Let's take a look here. So we've got a max blast of 13 degrees centigrade. You can actually see now that our weights match beautifully, our N1s actually match perfectly. Okay, let's go look at the speeds. So we got flaps 1. Let's just bring over what PMDG says. We'll look at what the PMDG trim says, the max thrust trim setting. And what do we got? We got 25, 28, 37. We got 26, 28, 37. So 1 knot difference in V1. Our trim setting of 6.1. So we'll go ahead and adjust. Why not? We'll adjust that 1 knot to 126. Now that we've got our speeds, 137, and our box is fully programmed, we can arm VNAV for our takeoff. We'll set our trim thrust, or our trim setting is 6.1. We're pretty much ready to go. That would be essentially to the point where you can run your before push checklist to verify all your performance data. Now let's do this again, and this time we're going to go wind shear no, and this time we're not going to get a max thrust takeoff. So we'll run through these numbers again. The only thing that's going to change is our assumed temperature, and we're going to drop that wind shear speed. You can see it says none down here now for remarks, and it says reduced, so it's a reduced thrust takeoff. So we'll plug that in. 54, we should get 88.9 or very close. So let's go back here. Oops, let's go perf, N1. We're going to put in that temperature of 54 for the assumed temperature. It gives us a reduced thrust setting. 88.8. We had 88.9. Awfully close. It says takeoff speeds deleted, of course, because we changed this. As far as climb thrust settings are concerned, use whichever one you want. The real world PWB would give you a climb thrust setting, and that's if you put in obstacles, climb gradient for departure. We don't have anything like that. If you want to use a reduced climb thrust setting, knock yourself out. I used to use the climb 2 just so I don't exceed the 250 below 10 if I'm not paying close attention. And you know, if you're in a mountainous area, probably just leave it and climb. Make sure you climb like Reno or something, climb over all those obstacles. Okay, 131, 132, 136. Again, this is max thrust trim setting, so we're not going to use that for this instance because we're doing a reduced thrust takeoff. So 131, 132, 136. 1 knot off on V2, so we'll bump that up to 137. And our trim thrust, or I'm sorry, our trim setting is going to be 6.2, so we'll adjust that. 6.2, really not much of a change there. Okay, now, why might there be a 1 knot difference? Why might there be a slight difference in the N1 here? Well, Ryan and the guys, they put a lot of data in from the Boeing FCOM. PMDG obviously has its own data, has its own database. Obviously, they're very close to one another, but they don't match perfectly. You're going to have to accept some variances, but you can rest assured that the data that the guys have in LC5 is extremely good. The PMDG data is extremely good, but this just adds a whole nother dimension to your sim flying. Let's take a look at landing performance then. So we're going to fly up to Sacramento, and our zero fuel weight of 119.3, that doesn't change. The airplane didn't change. We didn't lose passengers midair, hopefully. We didn't lose any cargo midair, hopefully. Fuel says 6.3. That's our planned landing weight. Again, that came right off the dispatch release here. Actually, I adjusted that. 5.1 is what number would automatically populate right here. Now, I adjusted that because when you go to your prog page and you look at your flight plan, if you were in the air flying along, it's going to be constantly looking at your fuel burn, and it's going to update this number right here, 5.9, and it's going to say this is the fuel that it's predicting that you're going to land with at Sacramento based on all your current conditions, speed, etc., leg length. So it's got its performance calculations going on in the background. This is the number that you're going to want to use when you're doing your top descent tasks and you're calculating out your landing performance. Use this number here on your prog page. Look straight across, 5.9. So I'm going to adjust this number here to 5.9. And I'm going to run my landing performance at Sacramento. 17 right, landing flaps 30, reverse thrust is operational, and we'll say RCC, we'll say it's wet. We'll say it was raining there in Sacramento and now it's wet. So since it's wet, we are required to use auto brakes. If it was dry, we would not. And this is the data it gives us. Outside air temperature of 9. Winds 150 at 9, altimeter, we're going to land 17 right, landing weight of 125.2 with a maximum runway landing weight of 129.2. That's our structural limitation. Flaps 30 is going to give us 132 and 137. We've talked about how to calculate target versus the winds. It's the half the steady state headwind plus the full gust factor. If you've got questions on that, ask in the Discord. Auto brakes 736. 3 is 2311 and max 3836. That's your stopping margin. And what does that mean? Essentially what that means is, I'm going to read you a statement here. It says, PWB stopping margin information is based on the assumption that aircraft touchdown occurs at the 1,500 foot mark from the usable end of the runway. If touchdown occurs beyond the 1,500 foot mark, the available runway length remaining will be less than the PWB system computed stopping margin, and in some cases the remaining runway length will be insufficient to stop the aircraft. So this is basically saying from the usable end of the runway plus 1,500 feet. If I touch down in that first 1,500 feet, or let's say I touch down at exactly 1,500 feet, with auto brakes 2, I'm going to stop the aircraft with 736 feet remaining. So there's a 1,500 foot buffer, if you want to call it that. Now, if I land beyond 1,500 feet, this number is obviously going to reduce. So you got to think about, if you're using auto brakes, you know, what you're doing to yourself if you float beyond 1,500 feet. Now, that's not to say that I can't get on the ground and then just step on the pedals harder and simulate maximum braking and stop the aircraft with plenty of margin. But keep that in mind. Instead of floating down the runway, trying to grease the thing on, when you've got a place like Midway where maybe 2 and 3 are just dashes, meaning they're bracketed, there's negative stopping margin, and all you have is, say, 500 feet with maximum braking, you better not be landing any further than 2,000 feet down the runway. So here's another statement. The shortest of the following distances is the latest touchdown point, and a go-around is required if touchdown occurs past the latest touchdown point. 1/3 of the usable landing length. So here you've got the runways. Here's your usable landing length. So 8605. All right. 1/3 of that, we'll do the math here in a moment. 8605 divided by 3 is 2,868 feet. We're going to keep that number in mind. Our second number to keep in mind for our LTP is always 3,000 feet. So we've got 3,000 feet, we got 2,868 feet so far, which was 1/3 of our runway. Or the last number, 1,500 feet plus PWB stopping margin for the level of auto brakes selected. So let's say we're going to use auto brakes 2. We got 736 feet. We're going to add 1,500 feet to that, and we get a number of 2236. So of all the 3 different numbers that we came up with, 3,000, 2,868, or 2236, 2236 is the smallest number of the 3. So what are you supposed to do with that? What you're supposed to do with that is take that number, 2236. You can use this little thing down here, and you can approximate, hey, brief your FO. If I don't touch down by Alpha 5, we're going around. Okay? That's what that's all about. I don't want to say too much more about that. We're just going to carry it on, and it's going to end up taking a long time. So just keep that in mind, that when you have an auto brake stopping margin, it's calculated using that number, 1,500 feet from the usable end of the runway. So you want to make sure in this case you touch down no later than 2,236 feet from the threshold. Okay. What are you going to do with that number? 132, 137. You know, say you're going to use auto brakes 2. You're going to want to come down in here, you know, for your approach, and of course you're going to plug those numbers in. So we're going to say flaps 30. We said VREF was 132. Plus 5 was our wind correction additive. So that's all you really need to do for your landing performance data. Not too much else to say about that. Hope that helps. If you have any questions, feel free to ask in the Discord.